Last summer, me and some of my friends took a trip to Bosnia, where I observed large swaths of homeless people everywhere that I went. And according to the World Cup Homeless Foundation, a war in the 1990s actually caused 2.2 million Bosnians to be displaced from their homes. And since then, the current unemployment rate there is still 20%, and 16% live below the poverty line. This may seem like the result of a semi-developed and post-Soviet nation, but we actually see a very similar situation unfolding within the United States. We see that homelessness in the United States is not being sufficiently addressed, and a large-scale policy proposal is necessary to eliminate housing insecurity and ensure that we decrease the poverty rates in the United States. So homelessness in the United States, what does that look like? We see that currently a shocking 3.5 million Americans sleep in shelters or places not meant for human habitation every single year. And that's greater than the amount that were displaced in Bosnia in the 1990s. So we see that there's a very real humanitarian crisis happening right here in America. Some more statistics on homelessness in the United States. According to the National Law Center and the National Alliance to End Homelessness, 7.4 million people every year lose homes and are doubled up with somebody else as a result of economic instability. 1 in 30 children in the United States experience homelessness every year. So it's not simply white old men that you see in the streets or just veterans even, who we do have a lot of sympathy for naturally, but 1 in 30 children in the United States experience homelessness every year. We also see that in 2019, homelessness actually increased by 3%. So these numbers are in fact rising significantly, and 3% of 3.5 million is still a significant number. And they're expected to skyrocket in 2020, according to analysis conducted by the National Alliance to End Homelessness due to the COVID crisis. And so COVID-19 isn't making this any easier. In fact, it's making it a lot harder in a lot of ways. So how does all of this actually affect our communities? Like, why do we care about this on a regular basis just for like me and you in like a normal sense? Well, we actually see that according to Sean Donovan, who works for the U.S. Housing Department, we see that per year, per person, for every person that remains homeless, they cost $40,000 every year to remain on the streets. So that means that taxpayer money, like your money and my money, is actually going to keep people on the streets. And this is going to things like funds for, temporarily being in jail, or for even just, soup kitchens and that type of thing. But they're still having to remain on the streets, and that's costing us this extra sum of money per person every single year. So how do we solve such a large economic and humanitarian crisis? One idea is passing the Ending Homelessness Act of 2019, as was introduced by Chairwoman Maxine Waters on the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services. And she stated, she proposed this bill because of 3 key elements of it that make it a very, very strong candidate for what we could do to end homelessness in the United States. First of all, we could construct permanent housing in the U.S. We see that $5 billion, according to this act, would be allocated to homeless assistance grants and the construction of 85,000 new housing units. That's 85,000 more people that wouldn't have to go without a home as a result of the passage of this act. In addition to that, $1.05 billion every year would go to the National Housing Trust Fund for the construction of 25,000 new housing units. And there would be priority for those who are experiencing homelessness. This organization does currently exist, but there isn't priority for those who actually need it the most, which are those who currently don't have any housing whatsoever. So those housing units would now be prioritized for those people. So overall, we see that we have 110,000 new permanent housing units constructed as a result of this act. That's 110,000 people out of those 500,000 people that experience homelessness every year that would now have a home. Next, we see within the act that there are housing choice vouchers included. This act allocates $2.5 billion for new housing choice vouchers. Essentially, that's 300,000 housing vouchers that would be passed as a result of this act. And what housing vouchers do is they give rental payments for low-income individuals for safe and sanitary housing according to the Texas Department of Housing and Safety Services, with priority on those who are currently unhoused. So that's what this act would change, once again, is it would put the priority for these housing vouchers on those who currently don't have stable housing. And then the last thing that this act does, once again, according to the U.S. Financial Committee in the U.S. House, was it would expand outreach and coordination efforts. We see that $500 million would be delegated to fund outreach and ensure homeless people are made aware of available programs. We see that $20 million for states and localities would be going to coordinate these federal programs with the state and local programs. So essentially, this would reduce the burden on local programs to have to figure out all of this for themselves, and it would help them coordinate federally with whatever they have going on at home to reduce red tape overall. So what does the world look like when similar policies have been passed? What would this actually do in the real world? Because we need some statistics actually showing if this would make any kind of impact whatsoever, right? Well, what we see is that according to Caring Works, who is an organization that goes in and plans long-term housing in Los Angeles, they went and they built a bunch of long-term housing in Los Angeles County. And we see that the Rand Corporation did a study on them, and they found that the cost to taxpayers as a result of permanent housing decreased by 60% in the areas where Caring Works went in and actually put in more permanent housing, which is exactly what this act does. It puts in permanent housing. The Los Angeles County also saved 20% of what it used to spend on helping homeless people within the city. So we see that overall, this act has been proven to work. In this situation where we went in and put more housing units in place, we see that we actually save taxpayer money and we save the county money. And in addition to that, we help in a humanitarian way those who need housing the most. So lastly, what can you do? Well, you can take ownership and do your part. The first thing that you can do is you can donate to local shelters and national nonprofits dedicated to ending homelessness. Next, you can volunteer with programs like Habitat for Humanity, Family Promise, and Twin City Mission. And lastly, you can write letters and make calls to your local congressman asking them to pass the Ending Homelessness Act and legislation like that locally so that we can build more permanent housing and have a more permanent solution for the homelessness crisis in the United States currently. So what should we do? We should pass the Ending Homelessness Act. And as Americans, we have a duty to band together on this. We need, especially in the face of COVID-19, to come together for our fellow Americans so that every American has a voice, is heard, and is given the kind of permanent housing that they deserve. Thanks.